The world knew a different Ted Bundy, the serial killer who spread fear, fascination, and disbelief across America. A man whose crimes still haunt our collective memory decades later. But behind the monster the world came to know, there was another Ted Bundy that only Elizabeth Klopfer knew. To her, he wasn't a headline or a horror story. He was the man she loved, the man she trusted, the man who held her daughter in his arms. But what Liz didn't know was that she was living with America's most dangerous predator. And in time, it would be her voice, her courage, that would lead police to the man the world feared most. Years later, she told her story in a haunting memoir called The Phantom Prince. My Life with Ted Bundy. This is Ted Bundy, not as the world saw him, but as she did. Welcome back to Prison Stories. Today, we're diving into the hidden side of Ted Bundy, seen through the eyes of the woman who loved him and helped bring him down. Before Ted Bundy became a headline, Elizabeth Klopfer was living a quiet, ordinary life. She'd moved from Ogden, Utah, to Seattle as a young single mother, trying to build stability for herself and her little girl. She worked as a secretary at the University of Washington School of Medicine. Long days of filing and phone calls, and evenings spent juggling bills and bedtime stories. One night in 1969, she and a friend ducked into a neighborhood bar called a Sandpiper to escape another man who wouldn't leave them alone. There, across the dim room, she noticed a young man with a clean-cut smile and a calm confidence. She walked up and opened with a line that made him laugh. "You look like your best friend just died." It was a kind of small, human moment that suddenly makes strangers feel like more than strangers. As she wrote later in her book, Ted was different from the rest, polite, ambitious, and oddly attentive. He moved into their lives quickly, dinners, walks, and weekend trips. To Liz's parents and to her daughter Molly, he looked like the kind of man who could be family. Molly, who was about 3 years old when their relationship began, took to him the way a child takes to a new, gentle adult, trusting, unguarded. For 5 years, in the ordinary rituals of life, Liz believed she found something rare, a steady partner, a man who could be a father to her child, and someone she might one day marry. But beneath those small domestic scenes there were shadows, two faces of the same man, one that smiled for family photos, and another that no one could have imagined. It didn't begin with a scream. It began with absences. Late evenings when Ted simply vanished without a word. Crutches or a cast left behind on his living room floor. Plaster Paris under the driver's seat of his car. A single rope coiled in the trunk. The faint smell of gasoline inside his jacket. Based on Liz's recollections of odd items found in Bundy's possession, Liz told herself he was under pressure from law school. He was ambitious. He had goals. He would talk about the future. And so she let the doubt slip away. But as winter gave way to spring of 1974, the news began to shake her. Young women were disappearing in the Pacific Northwest. College-age, long-haired, often last seen leaving bars, sorority houses, or campus events. Investigators in Seattle began calling the mystery the campus killer. Then on February 1st, 1974, 21-year-old Linda and Healy vanished from her basement room near the University of Washington campus. The bed was neatly made, the sheets blood-stained, a pink satin pillowcase missing. A month later, on June 11th, 18-year-old Georgianne Hawkins disappeared from an alley behind her sorority at the same university. Bundy later admitted responsibility for her abduction and murder, and girls kept on disappearing with name Ted out on everyone's lips. For Liz, this was no longer background noise. The car he drove, the way he asked for help when he claimed to be injured, the midnight drives up north, every piece began to sound like the same code she'd ignored. In her mind, the questions kept piling up. Why the suits and weekends away? Why the voicemail from a random motel? Why did he never tell her where he'd been? And when she opened the paper one morning and saw a sketch of the suspect, a young man matching his build, hair parted in the middle, a Volkswagen in his past, her blood ran cold. She had convinced herself he was innocent for so long that the idea of being wrong seemed more dangerous than suffering the truth. The seed of fear was planted. Late that night, she found herself at a payphone. Her hands were trembling as she whispered the details to the police tip line. She didn't give her full name. She just said, "I'm worried. My boyfriend matches the description." She couldn't say it with certainty, but the fear was real. Back at the station, detectives took note, but Ted Bundy was clean. No arrests, no record. He was a good law student, polite, ambitious. There were thousands of men named Ted, thousands of VW Beetles. The tip got lost in the noise. Ted Bundy's move to Utah can be seen in two ways: a fresh opportunity or a tactical escape as the circle of suspicion closed in a home. In August 1974, Bundy enrolled at the University of Utah Law School in Salt Lake City. To Elizabeth Kendall, he said it was about ambition, a chance to study law, build a career, and create a future together. Liz stayed behind in Seattle, tracking the news, reading each bulletin with a growing pit in her stomach. He called often, reassured her, and each time she needed to believe him. But deep down, fear was taking root. August 16th, 1975, a late night, a quiet street in the Granger neighborhood of Salt Lake City, Utah. Ted Bundy was behind the wheel of his tan Volkswagen Beetle when Bob Hayward of the Utah Highway Patrol noticed him driving without his headlights on. A search turned up what would later be called a killer's kit: a ski mask, a second mask fashioned from pantyhose, handcuffs, a crowbar, an ice pick, rope, nylon trash bags, and even a guide to Colorado ski resorts checked next to the Wildwood Inn. Meanwhile, back in Seattle, Liz's world was shifting. She had read the brochure listing the Viewmont High School play. That evening, Deb Kent disappeared. She had seen the ski guide that pointed to Snowmass Village, where Nurse Karen Campbell vanished. She had followed each news bulletin, every trace of fear. And now the story intersected with her life. Bundy called her later, smiling as usual. "I blew the stop sign," he said. "They let me go. No big deal." For months, Liz lived between fear and denial, between the man she knew and the man the world was beginning to suspect. Her calls to the police had grown more frequent. She tried to convince herself he was innocent. Yet here, in a single-car pullover in Utah, the nightmare she tried to ignore had taken form. And though this wasn't the final arrest that ended the spree, it was the first that cracked his confidence, the first time the mask slipped. When Ted Bundy's trial began, the manifold crimes he was accused of came into full view. A killing spree of at least 30 young women, and many more suspected. Across the country, people watched. Liz followed every report, every clue, every headline, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the monster he truly was. In the early 1980s, while Ted Bundy sat on death row in Florida, Elizabeth Kendall, known publicly as Liz, began writing The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy, published in 1981. The book offered a rare and deeply personal look into the years she spent with him, long before the world knew his name. It wasn't written for fame or sympathy. It was her attempt to understand how the man she loved could also be capable of unimaginable horror. Bundy was still alive when the book came out. According to those close to him, he wasn't pleased. The idea that Liz had turned their relationship into a public story, a window into his private life, disturbed him. He dismissed it as emotional and inaccurate, though privately, it reportedly struck a nerve. As his appeals failed and execution drew near, Bundy finally began to confess. He admitted to killing more than 30 women across multiple states, revealing details only the true killer could know. On January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. The man who once smiled across Liz's dinner table, who read bedtime stories to her daughter, was gone. Yet her book remained, a symbol of how evil can disguise as love sometimes. Thank you for watching Prison Stories. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next one.